Welcome to In Focus with Ijaz Heather. Tonight we begin with a rumbling row between Turkey and Iran. Turkey accused Kurdish militants in early February of killing 12 Turks and an Iraqi who were being held hostage in northern Iraq. The incident prompted Iranian envoy to Baghdad, Iraj Masjidi, to warn that Turkish forces should not, and I quote from what he said, pose a threat or violate Iraqi soil. We do not accept at all, be it Turkey or any other country, to intervene in Iraq militarily or advance or have a military presence in Iraq. Masjidi was quoted as saying in an interview broadcast on Saturday. Turkey's Baghdad envoy, Fatih Yildiz, took to Twitter and stated that Iran's ambassador was the last person to lecture Turkey about respecting Iraq's borders. Following this, Turkey and Iran summoned each other's ambassadors on Sunday, escalating the row over the former's presence in Iraq. To discuss what exactly is going on, I am joined by Syed Mostafa Khoshcheshm, who is a journalist and analyst and has taught at a number of Iranian universities and academic centers, and George Szamuely, Senior Research Fellow, Global Policy Institute, and author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia. So thank you to both. We should also shortly be joined by Dr. Kamran Bokhari. But let's see what's going on here. So Turkish Foreign Ministry officials summoned Iranian Ambassador Mohammad Farazmand and told him Turkey expected Iran to be on its side in the fight against terrorism. This was reported by Anadolu, which is the Turkish state news agency. And Turkey's envoy to Tehran was also summoned on Sunday by the Iranian Foreign Ministry over comments made by Turkish Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu on Kurdish militants' presence in Iran. So, Mostafa Khoshcheshm, let's begin with you. What's going on?
Well, thanks for having me. Well, for quite a long time, Turkey has been meddling with the Iraqi sovereignty in northern Iraq. They have been having incursions into northern Iraq in order to bomb the Kurdish militants. In certain cases, there have been some prior coordinations made with other actors in the region. But this is not just part of normal Turkish-ish incursions into Kurdish territories in northern Iraq. Turkey has been a good friend of Iran in many aspects, but there are regional differences. I mean, when it comes to regional politics, there are differences, and Turkey has been playing somehow a very controversial role in northern Syria, in northern Iraq, in Azerbaijan. In many skirmishes and regional conflicts, you may trace, the foothold or the footsteps of the Turkish army and government. And sometimes they, start clashes and tensions in the region that spiral out of control. And in a region where we need more stability and security, unfortunately, sometimes the actions taken by the Turkish government start instability, rising instability in the region, like what we saw in many countries throughout the region.
Okay, Mostafa, sorry, let me interject here. Just a clarification for the viewers. Isn't Iran and Turkey, because the Turkish Foreign Ministry has said that they have always informed relevant parties, and you have also kind of, mentioned that. But Iran and Turkey are also cooperating with reference to the Kurdish militants. Isn't that correct?
It depends. There are various, as I was explaining, there are different Kurdish groups staying in northern Iraq. Some of them are recognized, terrorist groups, and Iran and Turkey have been cooperating with each other in order to clamp down on these terrorist groups that have been stationed in Gandil Mountains. And that there have been even some joint operations by the two, as well as sometimes the Iraqi side. in order to clamp down on these terrorists that have jeopardized security of the region of all these three states. But there are some other groups also that could not be seen as terrorists, but still Turkey makes incursions, and sometimes they continue these incursions not only through airstrikes, but also they go through land incursions, and they deploy troops in northern Iraq, irrespective and in violation of Iraq's sovereignty, without any coordination and outside any defense pact. So what Iran wants is that, okay, if there are terrorist groups, all actors should be informed first. Second, Iraq should, be informed and should allow Turkish incursions or clamp down on the terrorists. All these operations should not ignore Iraq's sovereignty over its territory.
Right. Let me George Szamuely here. Now, George, here's the thing. As Mostafa said, he's actually interestingly also mentioned Azerbaijan. And, during this recent last year's war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But then the Turks would turn around and say, well, Tehran was supporting Armenia in that war. So everyone has some kind of stake. Mostafa talked about northern Syria. The fact is that it's very clear that Iran has been fighting on the side of Bashar al-Assad. So everyone has some stake in this. Now, given these developments, do you think this is something that can be papered over, or is this something that has the potential to sort of escalate?
Well, of course it has the potential to escalate. What his ultimate goal is, it's always very hard to discern. He got himself involved in this conflict with Armenia and Azerbaijan, made life difficult for the Russians because he kind of embarrassed and humiliated Russia in his very vigorous policy. In Syria, he's again wrong-footed, obviously Bashar al-Assad, but he's obviously wrong-footed Russia. He's also involved in conflicts with Germany over the migrant situation. He's in conflict with France over drilling in the Mediterranean. So directing his policy towards increasing Turkey as a regional and even as, to a certain extent, a global power. And again, it's just part of the way Erdogan plays the game.
Okay. Now, since we don't have Turkish support, let me try and put that hat on. And so here's the thing, George. As I said, everyone has stakes within the region. Now, in northern Syria, obviously, Turkey has stakes and historical linkages. There's also the issue of refugees pouring into Turkey. Then, of course, with Azerbaijan, Turkey traditionally has a very strong relationship. So it's clear that there are these interests, and just like other state actors are going to watch out for their interests, one can always argue that Turkey is watching out for its own interests.
Well, I suppose so. It's hard to see what exactly those interests are. I mean, Turkey intervened in the civil war in Syria. He has sought to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad, a government that has been a traditional ally of Iran's. Iran is, after all, in Syria by invitation of the government in Damascus. So Iran is legally present in Syria. Turkey is not. Again, Turkey's got itself involved in the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. How is that anything to do with Turkey? I mean, it isn't really clear what these interests are, other than kind of exerting, Erdogan as a major global player. So again, now on the question of the Kurds in Iraq, I mean, yes, I mean, there clearly are interests with Turkey there. But nonetheless, I think that he's got himself into a confrontation with Iran, and that's simply again, part and parcel of his, trying to create crisis strategy.
Okay. Thank you. That was George Szamuely speaking with us. I'm also joined by Dr. Kamran Bokhari, Director of Analytical Development at the New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy. Thank you, KB. We were discussing this. Syed Mostafa Khoshcheshm is also with us. We began with him. Now, here's the thing. You wrote, I think it's just been a week or so, you wrote this longish piece in New Lines magazine titled The Coming Turkish-Iranian Confrontation, which was subtitled Rising Cold War Between Two Regional Powerhouses is Inevitable. And you mentioned this northern Iraq problem, February 16th speech of President Erdogan. And then you said that President Erdogan's statement came 2 days after an Iranian-backed Iraqi militia threatened to attack Turkish military forces in northern Iraq. So just give us a sense of why you think a rising Cold War is inevitable, and that also seems to suggest that these moves and counter moves have an escalation potential.
Thank you, Ijaz, for the shout out for the essay. Look, I mean, these are two powers that are lined up against each other, geographically speaking. Let's start with Iran. Iran is essentially the dominant power with the most influence in both Iraq and Syria. And that creates three borders with Turkey. So there is the Turkish-Iranian border, the direct border, and then with Iranian-backed forces and Iranian forces in Iran and in Iraq and Syria, Turkey has two more borders with Iran. This is an unprecedented situation as far as the Turks are concerned. The last time these two powers were at each other, it was the other way around. Turkey was in control of both these Arab countries, and Iran was being checkmated. Now it's the reverse. So Iran didn't reach this situation just to sort of let it go. Iran, as everybody has seen, even despite the biting sanctions, has put a whole lot of investment, and I may add, at the risk of domestic political instability, under an intense sanctions regime to protect its assets, to protect its stakes in the Arab world, particularly in the Levant and Mesopotamia. Turkey, on the other hand, needs to come into this area for a variety of reasons that I go through in my long piece. And Iran is in its path. And therefore, and then as you mentioned earlier, there are 3 million refugees from Syria sitting inside Turkey. And from the Turkish point of view, there is a fire burning on its southern flank, and there is no way that they're just going to sit back and relax about it. So put two and two together. I mean, these two powers and their proxies are not just going to hug and kiss each other. They're going to fight.
Right. So let me take back to Syed Mostafa Khoshcheshm. Mostafa, Dr. Kamran Bokhari has actually put on the table the sort of, an overview of the situation and why this is going to become inevitable. So what's your take on this?
To be honest with you, I don't see a chance for a rising confrontation in military or in Cold War terms. Yes, Iran and Turkey helped each other a lot. Turkey helped Iran with bypassing the sanctions, and they are still helping Iran with doing that. There are, wide economic ties between the two countries, and there are good, relations in many areas, except for their differences over the regional geopolitics. Yes, there were tight rivalries when Turkey and Qatar, alongside they started this war of militancy in the region in order to conquer Syria and change the situation in Iraq, but they failed actually, and they were pushed back. Then Qatar and Turkey, which were had a main say in this equation, they withdrew forces to certain extent to northern Syria. And then they changed sides, actually, in this war. It's when they realized that Iran, Russia, Syria, and their allies, they are winning this war over the militants after they conquered Halab in northern Syria. They changed sides, actually. They never stood on the side of Iran and Russia, but they are going for 50-50 in order to keep themselves in the center stage. As you can see, the United States and others, they were sidelines in Syria and Iraq, but Turkey has been kept in the equation in the format of Astana talks. So, yes, President Erdogan is trying hard in order to promote Ottoman nationalism as well as Salafism of Muslim Brotherhood in the region, throughout the region, to Nakhchivan, to Azerbaijan. That's why they supported Azerbaijan a lot in the confrontation against Armenia in Karabakh. But that doesn't mean tough confrontation or rivalry. They might be rivalries with Iran, but not a Cold War, not a confrontation with Iran. Actually, I believe Erdogan is going to make a vital choice in here. Should he try to cooperate with Iran in all these lands, in Syria, Iraq, and Azerbaijan, and Karabakh, or would he choose to mend ties with Saudi Arabia and partner with Israel over these lands? As far as we know, there have been some minor cooperations between Turkey and Israel in the Caucasus, but it's not clear if it's going to continue and rise, this cooperation or not. So I believe Erdogan and Turkey have, very vital, decision-making ahead. Should they continue rising cooperation with those players, or try to, partner with Iran, which has a mainstay in this region, its regional kingpin, and try to work out joint interests through cooperation on all across these lands?
Right. Kamran Bokhari, it's interesting that Mostafa Khoshcheshm has talked about the sort of, Tehran, Riyadh, Tel Aviv nexus. From where I stand, I seem to see a relatively different scenario here, which is that, you talked in your essay about Turkey and Iran, but there's also rising tension between Ankara and Riyadh. And I think that possibly could be because Ankara thinks that it should be the leader of the Sunni world, what you call the geo-sectarianism in your essay, which is a great term, by the way. So, and Mustafa also said that there are differences as far as the geopolitics of the region is concerned. Now, the geopolitics of the region, if one were to actually draw a flow chart, is going to be a jumble. So when you say there are differences on geopolitics, then those are lots of differences as far as I can see, and they run pretty deep.
Of course, the Arabs don't want to counter Iran at the expense of empowering Turkey, but there are things that you want, and then there are things that you can have. Unfortunately, the Arab world, and that's the whole point of the piece that I wrote, does not have the wherewithal, the physical wherewithal to play major league geopolitics. This is a region, an Arab majority region, Sunni Arab majority region, that is dominated by three countries that are neither Arab. Only one of them is Sunni, and I'm talking about Turkey, Iran, and Israel. So yes. But to go back to what Mustafa was saying, I can accept that as something that that Iran wants to see, because Iran understands that it has reached the peak of the amount of influence it can project into the region. Now comes the part where they need to retain as much of that influence as is possible, because Turkey hasn't started yet, in earnest. And so they're preparing for that. They're under no illusions. What they say in press conferences everybody knows is just, the perfunctory and diplomatic niceties. But the reality is that at the end of the day, the Iranians understand that that what they were able to do with and just push it over is not possible with Turkey. And therefore, yes, they would want to be able to negotiate with Turkey, whether in Astana or somewhere else, and say, okay, let's divvy up, spheres of influence from the Levant through Mesopotamia, and, that force that kind of an understanding. But we haven't reached that stage yet. I think the Turks want to be able to try their hand at proxy warfare. Of course, the Iranians know this tradecraft far better because they've had a head start going back to the 80s, and the Turks are just sort of getting into this game. So we have a long road ahead of us. My piece basically didn't say what.
Yeah, so for the Turkish viewpoint, in fact, we've got John Hasasu, who's an analyst at TRT World. John, thank you so much for joining us. We are at the tail end of our discussion, but it's good to have you on the program. So give me your sense of, this sort of rumbling row between Ankara and Tehran over issues in northern Iraq.
Well, actually, Ankara is trying to have a stable relationship with the neighboring countries, and specifically with Iran. The Iranian-Turkish border actually is the oldest border between the two countries in the region, and it goes all the way to the Ottoman era. And Turks since then, since the Kasr-e-Shirin agreement, and it's more than 300 years, I guess, they haven't changed the border with Iran. And being one of the most important parties in the region, Turkey is trying to establish a realistic relationship with its eastern neighbor. And Iran being a powerful country affecting the developments in Syria, in Iraq, and the rest of the region, of course, they have a lot of things to deal on with Turkey. But Turkey, from the beginning, if we take the nuclear deal, for instance, was mediating to have a fair, to give a fair chance to Tehran to use this technology in the good of its own people. But developing a weapon which will escalate a lot of issues in the region, which is already complicated, was not something that Ankara supported from the beginning. But Turkey, even in that matter, just to give a fair chance to the Iranian people to develop economically and to have the reach to the electricity in a cheaper and better way, they were supporting the Iranian case, even though they are somehow competitors in the region.
Right. Now, very quickly, John, before I go back to Mostafa Khoshcheshm, the Iranian case is that Ankara is trying to destabilize the region, whether it's northern Syria, whether it's northern Iraq. It also sided with Azerbaijan. Of course, Iran sided with Armenia. So the point really is that the Iranian case is that Ankara needs to cooperate with Iran. And either it can do that, or it will just link up with Saudi Arabia or with Israel, and that's going to be a completely different scenario altogether.
Turkey is supporting a united Iraq, united Syria just from the beginning. And Turkey has become a model not only for the Arab world, but for the Iranians as well, as a secular and at the same time conservative country, or a country could provide a platform for everyone to express themselves. So Turkey being a model is more than enough a threat for any regime that tries to run an agenda and to suppress the demands of their people. So in that sense, Turkey is a threat for traditional governments and rules in the region, but unstabilizing the areas and involving in other countries' stability in the region, that's, I think, is not a realistic claim. Just if you take the visit of the Iraqi Prime Minister Al-Kadhimi within the last months to Ankara, the statements were the opposite. Turkey has supported Iraq's security and a united Iraq from the beginning, even though they have clashes with Bashar al-Assad regime today in Damascus. Turkey still supports a united Syria, but with the exception that people of Syria could choose their own future.
Right.
And
yeah, that's been Turkey's position for long. Now I'm left with very little time, so very quickly, Mostafa, before I wrap up.
Well, I believe away from all the differences, the original kingpins, Iran and Turkey, should realize both that there is much in cooperation that they cannot find in nationalism. There is much that they can find in cooperation that they may not find in cooperation with any other country, like, especially considering that Israel, like the United States, they want both Iran and Turkey to grow weak and weak. And then based on the U.S. Greater Middle East plan, they do not want any powerful country in this region, and they want the collapse of most countries in West Asia or the Middle East in order to secure the United States hegemony over the region, in order to secure the security of Israel. So I believe if Erdogan and Tehran both work out cooperations in Azerbaijan as well as in Nakhchivan, in Syria and in Iraq and elsewhere, they could gain a lot through joint cooperation, and they have a lot of joint interests.
Right. Kamran, very quickly, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is, optimism and the hope that, there's going to be some level of cooperation. But look, subjective preferences are one thing. Leaders of different countries do not get to do what they say they will do, much less what they want to. They do what they must. And regardless of what the U.S. is doing, regardless of what Israel is doing, the Iranians and the Turkish states are on a path towards confrontation. Eventually, it's not going to happen today, maybe not tomorrow, but it is, because the battle lines are drawn, the interests are conflicting. It's the same battle space, and we'll see in the years to come that this thing will play out, because you have mutually conflicting interests. Iran wants something in Syria and Iraq, and the Turks want the opposite. So yes, we'll have all sorts of nice gatherings and conferences and bilaterals and trilaterals, but at the end, it's interests that shape the behavior of states, especially in a very, very geopolitically fragile environment.
Spoken like a true structural realist. Thank you so much, Dr. Kamran Bokhari. Thank you to Syed Mostafa Khoshcheshm. Thank you to Jan Hasasu. We shall take a short break and return to discuss peace efforts in Afghanistan. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. The U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation, Zalmay Khalilzad, held discussions on Monday with senior Afghan officials in Kabul, including Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, chairman of Afghanistan's High Council for National Reconciliation. Khalilzad was in Kabul to discuss ways to accelerate the peace process. According to a U.S. State Department note, Ambassador Khalilzad and his team will also travel to Doha and additional regional capitals. He will resume discussions on the way ahead with the Islamic Republic and Afghan leaders, Taliban representatives, and regional countries. President Joe Biden's administration has ordered a review of the peace deal. The intra-Afghan talks have remained stuck, and some voices have called for extending the stay of remaining U.S. troops. U.S. troops are to withdraw completely by May this year, according to the original U.S. Taliban deal. Meanwhile, Taliban's deputy leader, Sirajuddin Haqqani, made a speech last Friday broadcast on the group's media channel with excerpts posted on Twitter. Haqqani warned the United States against going back on a commitment to withdraw. Today, we have the technology to use drones. We have our own missiles. This time, if the Mujahideen resume fighting the enemies, it would be something they have never seen before. They will wish the battlefield was like in the past. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Rahimullah Yusufzai, who is the resident editor of the news and based in Peshawar. Mr. Yusufzai, thank you so much for this. Let's begin with Haqqani's statement. It's very interesting. He's talking about drones and he's talking about missiles. Is this just bluster, or is there some truth to this?
Taliban have acquired these commercial drones which are available in the market, and they have been used by Taliban to attack some of these air bases in the north. So it's not something new, and the Afghan government has also conceded that Taliban have got these drones. I think that anything which is available in the market that can be bought for the right price by any militant group. So that is one thing. It was used to attack an airfield in Kunduz and I think Baghlan in the north. Now, we don't know how much damage was caused, but this is something new and which will escalate the fighting in Afghanistan. But I think, Sirajuddin Haqqani, also called Khalifa by his followers, was chosen to give this very tough statement. And, he has been fighting all his life. His father, Jalaluddin Haqqani, was fighting all his life. And, some of his brothers were killed in the fighting. So, in a way, he is the military man. He is the one who can escalate the fighting. He is a feared military commander by the U.S., its allies. And I think the statement coming from him is like a warning that, you have to implement the Doha Agreement. Otherwise, we will then start attacking you with whatever weapons which we have.
Right. Now, here's the thing. As I said in my opening, there are voices in the US and elsewhere also that are saying, well, unless the intra-Afghan talks proceed apace, which, as I said, they're not. I mean, they're stuck on some very basic issues, then the US should not withdraw by May. Is that something that you think is likely to happen, especially given the review of the policy?
I think the review will lead to a decision which will be to prolong the stay of the US and NATO forces. I think that looks likely now. And, they have taken quite long to complete the review. But I think that, there are very strong figures in the US who are demanding that this deadline should be skipped, that Taliban cannot be trusted, that the Afghan government will be abandoned. So I think it looks that the US, will seek more time. They will give reasons. And the reasons are that Taliban have not implemented their part of the commitments. But Taliban also have the same complaint. So I think that, what is going to happen is that maybe there is an escalation in fighting, and then they again come to the negotiations table, and they talk to each other, I mean the American and the Taliban, and reach some kind of an agreement, maybe some extension in the period of withdrawal. That is a possibility.
Right. So what will happen to the original deal that the Americans and Taliban signed in February?
Basically, that deal will stay, but you can make amendments. The Americans will seek more concessions from Taliban. Taliban also, in return, may seek concessions. So, in a way, we can say that this deal will be reviewed, by both sides, not only by the Americans.
But you believe that there will be an interim period in which fighting will resume?
I think that Taliban would put pressure on the Americans, on NATO forces, on the Afghan government. The statement coming from Sirajuddin Haqqani also is very meaningful because he is the military commander. He is a top guy in terms of the military strength of Taliban. So coming from him, it shows that Taliban are preparing, Taliban are ready to resume the attacks against the US and NATO forces. That I think is possible now. And the Americans will retaliate with airstrikes, and there will be casualties. And I think that would lead to an intensive stage of fighting. But eventually, I believe that they have to talk. There's no other way this issue can be resolved.
What do you think is likely to be Pakistan's position in this? I mean, we can see that before May, the Americans are going to tell Islamabad that, you need to get into this and you need to get it fixed. Now, is it possible that we can do that? Or as we keep saying that we have already done what we could do?
If you have followed the statement by CENTCOM Commander General McKenzie,
yes,
that was really very tough and very critical of Pakistan. He blamed Pakistan for giving sanctuaries that the Taliban were using Pakistani territory to launch attacks in Afghanistan. So it means that the Americans are going to put more pressure on Pakistan. And they think that, Pakistan should do more, Pakistan has not done enough. But, Pakistan has reacted by saying that before making their review public, the US should share this with the Taliban and give them some time if they want to, make amends, if they want to, do something about it. So that is also very interesting because Pakistan still wants to save the Doha Peace Accord. And if it is not saved, let me add that, I think that there will be more bloodshed, many losses on the battlefield. The positions of all sides will become tougher, and it will take a while to restore calm and resume the negotiations. So I think they should do it now before it gets out of hand.
Correct. I agree with you. Thank you so much. That was Rahimullah Yusufzai speaking with us on the situation in Afghanistan. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.